The fragile logic behind financial stability. Stability looks solid from a distance. Numbers line up. Volatility fades. Confidence settles in. It feels like balance has been achieved. But beneath that calm surface, stability is often held together by assumptions few ever question. This matters today because modern financial stability is not a natural state. It is constructed, designed, maintained through incentives, rules, and expectations that work only as long as behavior stays within a narrow range. When it does, everything appears strong. When it doesn't, the logic begins to strain. To understand this fragility, we have to stop thinking of stability as strength. Stability is agreement. Agreement about value, about timing, about what risks matter and which ones can be ignored. As long as that agreement holds, the system feels predictable. At first, the logic seems sound. Guardrails reduce panic. Backstops prevent collapse. Coordination limits extremes. Each layer makes the system smoother, quieter, more controlled. Shocks are absorbed. Corrections feel manageable. Stability becomes the expected outcome. But this is the reveal beginning to surface. Stability changes behavior. When protection exists, risk is taken differently. When intervention is expected, caution shifts. The system does not remain static. It adapts around the rules meant to protect it. Participants respond rationally. They follow incentives. They optimize within boundaries. Over time, those boundaries become reference points instead of limits. What was once protection becomes assumption. What was once extraordinary becomes normal. The early tension forms here. Stability is maintained by mechanisms that quietly encourage dependence on stability itself. The calmer the system appears, the more behavior relies on that calm continuing. Resilience is slowly replaced by expectation. This is why stability often looks strongest just before it is tested. Not because danger is imminent, but because belief has grown comfortable. The logic has not failed. It has simply become too trusted. And when trust replaces awareness, even well-designed systems begin carrying risks they no longer see. As stability became expected, the system reorganized itself around that expectation. Behavior adjusted quietly. Risk was no longer evaluated by consequence alone, but by likelihood of interruption. If disruption seemed unlikely, exposure felt acceptable. Institutions refined this logic into models. Historical calm reduced measured risk. Volatility suppression justified leverage. Guardrails became inputs rather than safeguards. Stability was no longer something to protect. It was something to use. Markets absorbed this mindset instantly. Pricing reflected confidence in continuity. Shocks were treated as temporary. Corrections were seen as opportunities, not warnings. The system rewarded those who leaned into calm rather than prepared for its absence. This is where the reveal deepened. Stability does not eliminate risk. It relocates it. Pressure accumulates where assumptions are strongest. The longer calm persists, the more behavior aligns around it. The system grows efficient, but brittle. The early conflicts sharpened beneath the surface. Risk-taking increased not because participants were reckless, but because the logic encouraged it. Protection had worked before. Intervention had arrived before. Stability felt reliable. But reliability breeds dependency. Dependency narrows perception. When outcomes are managed repeatedly, early signals lose urgency. Imbalance feels survivable because it has always been survivable before. The system did not ignore risk. It reclassified it. Threats that fit past patterns were monitored closely. Threats that did not were discounted. Attention focused inward on known failures, while exposure formed elsewhere. The fragile logic behind stability is not that it fails suddenly. It is that it succeeds so consistently that it teaches the system the wrong lesson. And that lesson sets the stage for the moment when stability is asked to do more than it can deliver. The conflict reached its emotional peak when the system encountered stress that did not fit its expectations. Not a familiar shock, not a known failure, but a disruption that arrived from the edges of what stability models had learned to watch. Behavior changed before numbers did. Liquidity hesitated. Correlations shifted. Small fractures appeared in places the system considered safe. The logic that had managed past risks offered little guidance, because this pressure did not resemble the last one. This was the heart of the tension. Stability had been engineered to respond to known dangers. It had grown excellent at preventing repetition, but by focusing so intensely on what had already happened, it left itself exposed to what had not. Institutions reacted with confidence at first. Safeguards were in place. Tools were ready. Protocols were followed. Yet each response felt slightly misaligned, as if aimed at a problem that existed somewhere else. Stability was active, but not adaptive. Markets sensed this disconnect quickly. Movements became uneven. Safe assets behaved unpredictably. Signals contradicted one another. Participants struggled to interpret what mattered because the old markers no longer aligned with behavior. The emotional weight of this moment came from realization. The system had not become fragile because it lacked protection. It had become fragile because protection had narrowed its field of vision. Attention had been trained toward familiar threats, leaving little capacity to recognize new ones. Pressure accumulated quietly. Not panic, but confusion. Confidence remained, but it became conditional. Each intervention worked briefly, then faded. Stability felt present, but incomplete. The buildup was complete. The logic that once delivered calm was now being asked to interpret uncertainty it was never designed to see. And systems that mistake familiarity for safety often discover their limits only after adaptation becomes urgent. The question was no longer whether stability mechanisms would activate. It was whether they were looking in the right direction. The resolution did not come from abandoning stability, but from redefining how it was understood. The system began to accept that protection alone was not awareness, that preventing yesterday's failures did not guarantee readiness for tomorrow's uncertainty. The climax arrived with a shift in mindset. Stability was no longer treated as a finished state to preserve, but as a temporary condition that required constant re-examination. The focus moved from maintaining calm to maintaining curiosity, from enforcing rules to questioning assumptions. Institutions adjusted accordingly. Oversight expanded beyond compliance and toward behavior. Instead of asking whether safeguards existed, the system asked how incentives were changing beneath them. Attention widened to include what models did not yet recognize as risk. This shift restored adaptability. Flexibility regained value alongside control. Signals from unfamiliar places were no longer dismissed simply because they did not match past patterns. Stability became dynamic again, capable of learning, not just repeating. The resolution reshaped the meaning of resilience. True stability was no longer defined by how rarely the system was disrupted. It was defined by how quickly it could adjust without breaking. Calm was no longer the goal. Awareness was. What endured was a central lesson behind every stable system that survives long enough. Stability fails not when pressure arrives, but when confidence prevents learning. Protection must evolve. Rules must be questioned. And success must never be mistaken for permanence. The fragile logic behind financial stability is not that it is weak. It is that it works so well it tempts the system to stop looking. And the moment a system believes it finally understands risk is often the moment risk has already changed shape. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. The